Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How are you? Welcome. Welcome to Reimagining Us as 21st Century Educators, as lifelong learners. I'm Caron Martinez, 8-year professor in the Writing Studies program, someone who helped teach our writing sequence 100, 101, our 106 class. When I was really lucky and blessed, they threw me a creative writing class. And I'm now the director of the Business Writing Center at Kogai. So 2 buildings down, many worlds away, and a professional silo buster. So I'm so happy to see people from different units. I'm so happy to be here presenting with colleagues from different units as well. We have Naomi Moland with us. We have Wanda Wigfall-Williams. Neisha-Anne Green, unfortunately, is not able to join us. I have a lovely statement from her that I'm going to read as her contribution to this session, so I'll get to that in a few minutes. AU has become, to its credit, a much more diverse place. For someone who started teaching here 10 years ago now, how many of the rest of you have been here 10 years or longer? Anyone? Okay. Is it fair to say that we've seen our student population change in ways that increase representation, diversity, right? And so our project really becomes, how do we take advantage of this amazing multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic, gender, learning differently, all of these ways, how do we get these students talking to each other, understanding one another, appreciating difference? And that's really the project of inclusion. And as you all know, as excellent, inspiring teachers and staff, this is nothing new. In fact, much of what you will hear will piggyback onto other kinds of pedagogies that we talk about and think about a lot. Pedagogies like student-centered learning, like community-based learning, like inquiry-based pedagogy, problem-solving, problem-based learning, PBL, for any of you who've seen projects around that. Because what we know is that to create inclusion, we need to invite students into the teaching experience. They need to be our partners in collaborative learning. The things they care about need to be the things we care about. Our approaches need to be ones that technologically, culturally, politically correct wise are not just lip service, but they're action that we live and appreciate. And any of you who've gone to sessions earlier today or who were at the plenary breakfast, we heard that from students, saying we want professors, faculty and staff, and we include staff, to know us, to know our culture, to know what we care about, to bring those values into the classroom. And I'm not exactly sure who's here. It was really great and fair in people to have a list of all of you participants that are here today. We run the gamut, and hopefully we'll introduce ourselves to each other in the smaller groups. But not everybody here is teaching subjects that might be immediately obvious to have diversity and inclusion. So that's even a greater, for our chemists and biologists who are here, our art folks, thank you for thinking about multidisciplinarity and for thinking about the kind of learning that will transform our students. I was really blessed to be a 5-year alumni trustee on my alma mater's college board, Williams College. And I was over and over impressed with this idea of the responsibility that's given us to form such a big part of the development of 17 to 22-year-olds, roughly. I mean, we have our veterans, we have returning students, but roughly we are entrusted with the social, emotional, value-driven, knowledge production growth of these young people. I just get chills. It's such an opportunity for us. So much of where we're coming from is to think about that privilege that we have and exploit it. And to be concerned, yes, about the knowledge and the skills, the content, absolutely. That's what that piece of paper has to stand for, right? Is that they have come and they have communed with scholars and they have learned approaches, facts, skills, the canon, whatever. But they also need to have learned those top 5 skills that employers are looking for that matter to us as a civil democracy. Can they lead in all the ways that you lead? As a quiet leader, as a humble leader, as a servant leader. Can you work in a team? The work world is collaborative to the nth degree right now. So do you have those skills of listening and asking and tolerating and welcoming and empathizing? Can you problem solve? And ultimately, can you communicate, right? It's all about communication. So my colleague, Naomi's already telling me I have 2 minutes. I practiced this discussion and I started off at like 15 minutes, so I'm going to really be good about keeping to the time. As Writing Center Director now at Kogot, we appreciate and lift up student voices, even when they're writing things like forensic accounting memos and case studies, especially in 2 ways. By validating their voices and their experiences, even into a memo about corporate social responsibility or the ethics of gentrification. The business world is not exempt from issues. There's a great New York Times article that came out on Christmas Day. It's in the list of resources in the handout we're going to give you about business students bringing issues around Uber and discrimination and gender to their professors and saying, we don't want to learn about finance in a vacuum. We need to learn about corporate strategic decision making in the realm of ethical behavior. And so students are driving that discussion. So we bring that value as we inquire and look at students' work. The other way is around sources. In the Writing Studies program, we spend so much time in a world of fake news, even more importantly. But in a world of inclusion, we had one student who was writing about gentrification in her hometown of East Oakland. She had been an activist as a high school student. And she knew homeless people, and she knew ladies and men who had lived in these neighborhoods and were being pushed out. She wanted to bring those voices to her paper, but she was concerned that they weren't credible. She found a website called Oakland Voices. That's a compendium of stories about people. Someone has heard of that and asked us, is this a credible source? The professor agreed that in that conversation around gentrification in a business course, you can't just look at dollars and cents. You need to look at people's voices. That student felt empowered then by being able. One last thing I'll say is I'm here to also lift up the work of my Kogot colleagues. Sonia Greer, who is on another panel as I speak on community-based learning, is our chair of marketing. She teaches an upper division class for juniors and seniors on social marketing. She had a combination of problem-based learning, scenario learning, student-centered learning by assigning her class. Please look into the problem of inclusion on the AU campus. Her client were AU administrators. People from the provost office, our own diversity office, came and set up their expectations as a client, and those students were tasked with finding solutions. And so I'm going to finish my part of this by reading to you some of what those students said from doing that project. She had them journaling throughout the semester. It was a semester-long project. So this was at the beginning. While the project is certainly a bit daunting, I'm excited about the opportunity to apply concepts and learning in a tangible, real-world way. Another student said, I enjoyed this project because it was a challenge to apply what we learned in class to a very real issue with consequences for this university. So this is learning that matters to students. And finally, working with the university as a client was very challenging, but it allowed my group to feel we were leaving something behind as we graduated. All in all, this project was one of the most difficult, but one of the most rewarding of my college experience. So I'll have more information for anybody who's interested in Sonia's assignment design, how she put that together, how she merged it with traditional marketing concepts. Did I go way over, ladies? No, not too bad.
Minutes over, and then now you're Neisha-Anne.
Now I'm Neisha-Anne. Now I am Neisha-Anne, and now my PowerPoint is not moving. Amanda, maybe you can help me get it to the next slide. So this is now Neisha-Anne, who is our director of our University Writing Center, my lovely and amazing colleague. I hope many of you know her, and if you don't, I hope you will get to know her. Caron, could you read this for me, please? Could you please tell the audience that anti-racism and activism is my thing? It was the focus of my keynote at IWCA 2017. Neisha-Anne was the national keynote speaker at the International Writing Center Association Conference in Chicago in November this year. That's how esteemed she is as a scholar in this field. Gives me chills. She's awesome. And it will be the focus of my presentation at the Writing Center 4C's Collaborative this coming March. I apologize for not being in the room, as this is a very hard time for me, having just memorialized my mom. Her mom passed away over the holidays. But I wanted to share a few thoughts nonetheless. My aim is to get the Writing Center to a place where all of the tutors operate with a socially and civically just mind. I want our beliefs to be crystal clear to faculty and students. That students write and operate knowing the expectations, values, and philosophy that we operate by, and that they know that before they come to see us. It will take time to break down myths and make tutors aware of things that are taken for granted, such as linguistic racism or the microaggressions I and some of their cohort as tutors face every day on this campus. I'm always thinking about what to instruct tutors to do when they get the paper that vehemently expresses that Hitler was a great leader. Yes, this has happened. Or what they do when a student asks a tutor why a Muslim was working on their paper with them. Yes, this has happened. This semester, the entire staff of the Writing Center started by re-examining our own unconscious and conscious biases. I believe that only through this honest examination of ourselves can we then try to understand the pain others operate under and what, in some cases, fuels hate. My plan is to use this to move towards a list of values we want to operate by. We will make those values explicit and use them as a foundation for each of us writing individual tutor philosophy statements. So strong emphasis on the self-awareness that she's inculcating in her staff. We'll then take those individual statements and collectively write a Writing Center philosophy statement, which we'll use to observe each other's work, keep each other accountable for our actions and statements, and finally use those values to write our own anti-racism statement, which she hopes to publish on their website for all to see. I want to be upfront and clear with the campus at large what we profess and what we expect from all who come to use our help. My plans also involve one anti-racist event a year, considered the Writing Center's gift to the campus. Last semester, we brought in 2 scholars to help faculty teach We Gon' Be All Right, which was the Jeff Chang Writing Studies program, Writer as Witness book. It was a wild success, and I already know what the next event will be, just not when. I also want to bring the director of the Writing Center and Writing Studies program from the University of Washington, Tacoma, to our campus to run workshops on his book on anti-racism, writing assessments, and ecologies, writing for a socially just future. I encourage all of you, this is almost over, to reach out to me or to visit the Writing Center. And for those of you who may not know, it's in the first floor, just beyond the reference desk in Bender, a beautiful new space. I'm always happy to share what I'm working on or help you think about your writing assignments and their reception, peer review strategies, assigned readings, etc. We've got a lot of work to do. Trust me, I know it and I feel it. There are only a handful of women of color in the United States who run writing centers, and AU is lucky enough to have 2 of the handful in Caron and me. I face the problems with this fact every day at work, but what I'm most sure of is that because of the things I face, I'm in a unique position to be a catalyst for change. I intend to let the change start with the Writing Center. It is because of this that Caron and I started out on the journey of envisioning your time with us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. So that's Neisha-Anne. She's amazing. And I do want to say that I'm a dinosaur teacher when it comes to paper. I'm so sorry, but we do have handouts that will have steps to take, from baby steps to larger steps. Naomi and Wanda will be talking about some of those, but in case you feel like you didn't get as much as you needed or wanted, and resources. There's a bibliography here as well, and some frameworks for thinking about your own teaching practice. So with that, I wind up, and I go to Naomi.
I promise I'll be just as strict on myself with time as I was on, so that's only fair. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm Naomi Moland, and I teach in SIS. I teach in the Intercultural International Communication Master's Program, and I also teach undergraduates. So Caron was so great, and Neisha-Anne, I was so happy that she read her statement there to kind of bring in perspectives both from COGOD and from the Writing Center, because sometimes I don't think we think about all the places on campus that need to think about diversity and inclusion, not only in the classrooms. And then Wanda and I think, are going to share a little bit more of a classroom experience, because we're faculty members that teach teach a lot more in classrooms that way. So we talked about today too, whether we wanted to kind of focus this session on curriculum or pedagogy, or both. And I think it's impossible to kind of separate them, and so we'll talk in some ways about how do we diversify our syllabi, but I also want to talk a little bit about pedagogy. How do we create classroom atmospheres that foster inclusion and the recognition of diversity and whatnot? Again, I think those two things are sort of interlocked. So I wanted to share, for my part, a brief anecdote that happened in my classroom last semester, in a master's classroom, because I've thought about it since, and I've sort of thought about what it taught me about building a classroom atmosphere. So it was during a discussion after the racist incident on campus, where Confederate flag flyers and cotton branches were posted around campus. So I believe that was in early October. And I opened, this was a master's level class, intercultural relations. And so I opened the class and just asked students what they knew about it, what they were thinking about it, thoughts that they had, whatnot. And I should mention, first of all, like Caron was saying, I know that my program has made sincere efforts to diversify our student body. So in this classroom of 28 students, there were 17 students of color. And I know this because we worked a lot on identity, so I know how people kind of identified in the class. So there were 17 students of color, 10 African-American students, and about 11 white students in this class. So obviously the people of color includes the African-American group that way, so a pretty diverse class. And during the discussion, it was predominantly the African-American students who spoke. They talked about what they felt about this, and one of the kind of threads that I think came up is that they were not shocked by this incident. They were sort of like, yeah, add it to the list. This has happened before at AU, this has happened before in my life. I've been experiencing these kinds of things at different times in my life. So they were sort of expressing, not being flippant about it per se, but also saying that they weren't shocked and that this was something that they've always had to work with. So we discussed a little bit more about it, and then we moved into the class session. And then during the class break, two African-American students came up to me and said, we really don't feel good about the way that discussion went. We're not comfortable with how it entered. And I had noticed that one of them had left after the discussion and gone to the bathroom, who knows, or I don't think she was crying, but she was upset. And so I said, okay, what was upsetting to you about it? And they said, none of the white students said anything during the discussion. And we feel like they don't, that to us communicates either that they don't care, that they don't know how to respond to this, that they don't sort of have our back, that they don't see how it affects them. And so I said, all right, well, thank you so much for telling me that. Would you be willing to share that with the class if I reopen the discussion? They said yes. So after the break, we did that. They shared, and they just said, this is what this seems like to us, that there were no white voices that were included in this conversation. And it felt like we were the only ones that really cared about this, that the African-American students were the only ones who spoke up during this discussion. And immediately about 5 white student hands went up and said things such as, we thought that it was important that we listened to your experiences because maybe this affected you more. We thought that it was important, just to hear the perspectives of students of color on campus who might feel more affected by this or more struggle with this. And then another white student said, I didn't say anything because I was shocked. And I was appalled, and a lot of you were saying, I'm not shocked, this happens all the time. And then I felt like if I said I'm shocked, then I look really green, really naive, really disconnected with reality, and I seem like I'm sort of not, woke, and not, not really knowing what's going on that way. And so I didn't say anything like that. So just for the sake of time, I want to, the discussion kind of went out. I'm not saying that we solved anything.
Solved racism.
Yeah, checked. But I will say that I think the discussion part 2 went a lot deeper than the discussion part 1 and brought up some really difficult tensions into our classroom. That's my 5-minute mark. I've got 2 more minutes. Okay. So one thing, a couple of takeaways that I've kind of thought about since then. One, which is a crucial one, is it helped all of us to learn that the same exact incident or the same exact reaction can be read very differently by different people, which actually is kind of a key tenet of cross-cultural communication. So that fit into our course content that way. So the white silence in this case was read by the white students as being respectful, let's give them their space, we want to listen to them. And it was read by the black students as saying, they don't care. They don't have our back, they're not interested in this. Another thing that was really striking to me is the fact that these 2 students felt comfortable coming up and talking to me during the break. So I do think that these are exceptionally bold students. These are master's students. But I also wonder, because I want to do it in the future, what was it about the classroom atmosphere that I had created that made them comfortable, first coming to me, and second, saying in the classroom, hey, white students, where are you? And really talking to their peers that way, in a way that felt safe to everybody. This was about class 6 or so, week 6 of the semester. So we were, what had we done so far to consciously build that kind of atmosphere, and how can I do that in the future? And then finally, I think that this sort of example helped us to think about that there's some tensions and dilemmas that will always come up in this kind of work, that we didn't sort of solve them, that, there's the tensions such as students of color want their experiences to be heard and want their experiences to be included, and they also don't want to be tokenized and called upon to always be sharing that. That's a tension, and that's always going to be there when we talk about these things. White students, I think some of the white students said, we were afraid that if we started talking that the conversation might shift to conversations about white fragility, and the students of color might say, oh, here we go again, the white students are taking over the conversation. So these are tensions that aren't going to go away. But I felt like by acknowledging those tensions with my students and sort of saying, listen, these are dilemmas and tensions that are going to continually come up whenever we talk about diversity and in our readings, we felt more comfortable with saying, we're not going to solve any of these things, but can we better understand other people's perspectives, and how can that be valuable? So I think today my hope is that we can, in our small groups a little bit, kind of talk about what are those hot moments in class, and what do we do during those times, and what can we do as instructors beforehand and during to sort of use those tense moments in productive ways.
Naomi, did you just want to give a 2-minute idea about the
Sure.
4 levels of competence?
Sure, yes. So,
and this
or
is
maybe should we do that at the end when we hand out the handout? I think that might be better.
We can do that.
Yeah, because then it'll be in front of them.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so it's me. All right, so I've been grappling with identifying materials, authors, exercises since I was about that high, because I didn't see myself, wasn't born in this country, I'm multiracial, and I just didn't see anybody who looked like me. And it was after I finished my doctoral work that I was sitting on a panel evaluating graduate student papers for a prestigious award. And I had graded or scored them, and one was written by a male, one was written by a female, at least. We'll just leave that there. I probably just stuffed in it. But anyway, I was tied. They were tied. And they were totally different styles. So one was doing regression analyses, while the other was doing qualitative work with some quants. And I thought, oh my God, I'm thinking like the people who taught me. I'm teaching and assessing this as an old white man. And there is nothing wrong with old white men, but I didn't want to be one. And so that made me want to go back and look at all of those things again, all of those papers that I had assessed, to make sure that I wasn't leaning in the direction that those who had taught me over the years had instructed me. Happily, I was not. And others on the panel had a similar experience. What ended up happening that year was we gave 2 awards because it kept coming up neck and neck. But it was something that was deeply disturbing to me at the time. So diversity is definitely not a new concept. The challenge that I find is the second piece of it, which you really can't separate them, but it's taking the leadership, being brave and courageous, and including those different voices. And you have to know who you are and what your limitations are before we can do that kind of work. If you don't know that, it's not going to work out. And the students smell any sort of fear. You know how that finishes. So when if you think about when you meet someone, your students, or when they meet you, they can only see you they can only know certain things unless they've gone online and looked at your bio, right? So they see what you're wearing, your hairstyle, your hair color, your eye color, how you speak, if you speak with any sort of regional dialect or what have you. And then because they only see the tip of the iceberg, if we think about it in terms of a metaphorical iceberg, they can only see what's sticking out from the water. There are 3 other levels that really inform our values, our traditions, our worldviews, and what our human needs are. And so they don't know all that. So in a snap judgment, we all do it, or I do it. I don't want to do it, and I have to catch myself from creating narratives about people. Because inevitably I'm wrong. I may create a narrative about student A based on a student 2 semesters ago who reminds me of student A, who I didn't necessarily think, well of. So you can see where the problem comes in. But do we have the time? Do we create the space to get to know people? And I think that's the beauty of how our classes are structured if it's a block over 14 weeks, if it's twice a week or 28 meetings. And usually by meeting 3, people begin to identify who they are. So I don't make assumptions. If I walk into a room and I see people who look white, because they may not necessarily identify as white. And I just can't do that. So I use their name, their first name, if that's what they prefer. And over time, it comes out who they reveal. Who, if I have 2 minutes left?
That's just fine. Sorry, I'm turning it off.
Okay. So we have that. So we have the surface level, intermediate level, which is below the water. That includes norms, symbols, and meaning, how we make meaning of the world around us. And we have deep level culture, traditions, values, beliefs and worldviews. And then under all that are the universal human needs. And universal is kind of a misnomer because with each individual or group, those needs may shift and change. Okay, so we can't leave out the history of culture because it's a big component of how we perceive the world. So I won't go into the entire list, it'll be on the handout under history, but there are about 11 different types of histories, including, and I didn't include this, stolen histories, hidden histories, and we're about to face a new type of history that we must be forward thinking about, and that is with climate refugees who are seeking places to store their traditions, their artifacts, and many countries will say, we don't want you, but we'll take your artifacts. So this is an important component. Included is sexual orientation histories, gender histories, racial and ethnic histories, diasporic histories, colonial histories, post-colonial histories, socioeconomic histories, and class histories, and so forth. What I want to suggest is that this is a lot. It's a lot. So start small. Start with a podcast. There's some really good ones listed on the resources. You can do something like that. Or the New York Times has a series called Race Related, and it's fabulous. Some weeks more fabulous than others. And a nice assortment of other things like Code Switch from NPR. So start there. I find it challenging not on a daily basis, but maybe every other day, when my students invariably one, and there's always one, who says, this is the first time I've had an N as a professor. Yeah, what do you say to that? Yeah, come here, let me smack the pigment off you. That's the internal dialogue. The external dialogue is, wow, I'm glad I'm your first. Let's see what happens. Then I slither home to my safety, the safety and sanctity of my own, and just shake my head and wonder when is it going to change. And I think it is changing, but this is not for the faint of heart. It truly isn't. And if I could just take one more minute. I teach a course, I'm in the same program that Naomi is in, but I teach a course on identity, race, gender, and culture. I love that course. It's so controversial. And so one of the things that I think is important is while we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that doesn't mean throw out all white authors. That's not what I'm saying. And in addition to that, it doesn't mean that we don't have to talk about whiteness and what that means from a white perspective. And that's not part of, well, it probably is part of my mixture, but it's definitely not how I identify. So last semester, I had broken the groups, the students into groups of five different groups. And one group said, we want to discuss whiteness from a white perspective. What do you think? Of course, that sounds good. Yeah. Do you have a reading? Do you want me to give a reading? No, we've got one. You want to look at it and see what you think? Like, it was challenging for them to talk about it because there was so much disagreement and fear and frustration. And I'll tell you more. Thank you so much for coming this morning and for allowing us to share our work. And I'm interested in hearing about what you're doing too.
To echo that and just build on that is that now is the part where we hope to cultivate some of that self-awareness, some of that sharing of self-awareness, some of your goals and ideas that you might implement as soon as this weekend, energized by this conference. So we'll just do our sort of loose teacherly thing of asking you to organize yourselves into 3 different groups, since there's 3 of us. And maybe somebody can come up into this front real estate, some groups here, one there. And then initially, all of you got that email from us with these questions. So we'll have you sort of take each other's temperature, get to know each other a little bit the first 5 minutes or so by thinking about these kinds of questions. And then we'll give the handout and you can look through some of the suggestions, as Naomi and Wanda said, some big, some small. Start with what you're comfortable with. I ran into Sherman this morning by the coffee urn, and she gave us even another idea that she actually just makes sure that she has 2 or 3 guest presenters that come in that represent a diversity and an inclusionary idea that she can't represent as well, given her worldview and perspective. Finding it hard in arts management to find published scholars that are people of color. So instead, it's people who are practitioners who are coming in with that kind of expertise. So I know there's really good ideas in the room. We want you talking to one another. So let's do that for about 15, 20 minutes, then we'll bring the group back together. Any questions so far? Great. And so I'll start with one group. A few ideas to inspire all of us, a few things you're wrestling with, came up with. Anybody, anything?
Oh, well, we just were closing. I was this whole concept of being inclusive and inclusivity, and I was just saying that my niece had posed a question of how do you, in trying to create inclusive environments, how do you not sacrifice authenticity in the name of inclusivity? And so that was a part of where we were closing. We just had a bunch of talked about the way that this challenge comes out in multiple classrooms and institutions.
I super liked your idea about trends.
Yeah,
Students to pay attention to trends.
Oh, we were just saying that it's easy for students to kind of come from a me perspective and say, well, based on my experiences, this is how I see the world. And so we were discussing how sometimes international students or students who come from different experiences may not have all of the context around a particular topic. And so it's trying to get students to look at, okay, forget the history of a conversation. Let's just start to look at trends. And whenever anything is happening kind of empirically in very specific ways, so all the people who are getting arts funding happen to be men, or most of the people who win, whatever are women, whatever the trend might be, helping to get students to look more empirically at that and then start to question, why is that? And what might be contributing to that? And how might that be perpetuating itself? So that even if you don't come to a society or a class or not with any background knowledge, you can still just say, well, let's just look and see what's happening here. And is there anything that's happening in a way that seems slightly off, and how that can help students to then look back at their own experience and start to identify places where maybe diversity or inclusivity was not happening, but they just didn't realize that maybe it wasn't happening there.
So pedagogically, as inquiry-based, it's giving it back to students to try to understand and formulate questions around. And authenticity, did that have an element of self-awareness for folks? Was that for us to know who we are, where we're coming from kind of idea, or was that authenticity piece?
Can you talk a little bit about self-awareness in the class that you were taking?
Yeah, I did have a professor who was absolutely amazing in terms of encouraging me to bring my own authenticity to course concepts and finding ways to sort of kind of match my personal experiences or my lived experiences to the course concepts and additional sort of kind of course materials that that weren't just written by old white men, but there was a wide variety. Yes, yes.
Good. Middle group, do you want to share an idea or two?
Yeah, we discussed, I think, sort of an underlying concept of the responsibility of educators to work into the curriculum or into their pedagogy reflexively, sort of looking at the structures that are going to shape the way this course is going to play out to an extent that we might not have complete control over, but that we still need to address as far as what's baked into that. where that comes from, and not let that necessarily dominate the entirety of where we're trying to go together, given what we have to try to learn in this time, but that's always something to bear in mind, and that we should look at how that does shape the way knowledge is being created in the process of creating an inclusive environment.
We talked about power and the power relationship and sharing power, empowering. That was kind of a concept of that group. Super interesting. Final group? I know it's hard. There was so much. I could hear how rich the discussion was. So, just share one thing you might be thinking about.
We talked about the importance of vulnerability in the classroom, sharing in that project with our students. We're asking our students to share from their own experiences or to question their stances, that we also have to do that somewhat a reflective practice. And then I shared that I'm still struggling with a balance of teaching material and skills in a way that doesn't perpetuate stereotypes to my students. And so your comment about looking at trends is really helpful.
Great. Well, this is just jumping off point. We are so happy that all of you brought your intentions and your plans and your self-awareness to enrich all of us. And we hope you'll find more inspiration on these pages as well. I know I speak for my 3 other colleagues, amazing colleagues, in saying that we are open and willing for you to contact each one of us for additional brain picking, cup of coffee, whatever. So if you will now turn your attention to, well, any questions as we head out the door? Yeah. I don't know if we have time, but okay, you want to give us a 30-second idea of what's on the handout?
Yeah, so I think just one, this is in front of you so you can look at it later or whatnot, but you know, we were thinking about how overwhelming these kinds of discussions can be, because like I just have a list at the bottom of the first page here. You know, maybe after coming to a session like this, you want to diversify your syllabus, you want to add more people of color to your syllabus, you want to add more LGBT people, you want to facilitate class discussions better, you want to have better conversation with students, you want to, et cetera, that can feel super overwhelming. And so one tool that I've used that's been kind of helpful to me is near the top of the first page there with this kind of competency framework. So let's say that there's something such as, oh, I need to include more diverse authors on my syllabus. First, I might say that I'm not good at that, but I didn't even know it. And then I come to a workshop like this, and I might come to the level of conscious incompetence, like, oh crap, I need to be including more people of color on my syllabus. And then a level of conscious competence where I really have to be careful about it. I'm looking at all my different classes, I'm thinking about the way that I teach, and then it becomes second nature. And this is the way that we learn everything, right? This is the way how I would learn how to play tennis or anything like that, where you have to kind of start at a level where you're not even aware of what you don't know. So I, as an instructor, try to pick like a couple of things, right? This semester, I want to focus on making my students more accountable for the reading. That's it. And hopefully try to keep the other things afloat a little bit, but I want to like, you know, focus on 1 or 2 things maybe that you learned today and think about how you can add them into what you do. So, and then on the second page, we have this fantastic list of resources that Wanda and Caron put together. So take a look through those resources and hopefully they can be helpful.
If you could all evaluate us, and I'm going to let the last word be Neisha-Anne, who showed up just to say hello and hey, and anything you want to say, just to say, here's my face, and here I am.
I just want to encourage everyone to keep trying in their classrooms. I know it seems really daunting, and students sometimes come in and it's like, it's very hard to put yourself on the spot as a person in front of the room and be vulnerable, especially when people don't always look like you, they don't have the experiences you have. And so what you're feeling, students are feeling it 10 times. And so what I usually do is I walk in, and as a class, we define what our safe space is. And I keep that definition with me. And I keep that definition at the forefront of everything we do, so that we're giving each other permission to be vulnerable with each other. And if you do that with your students and remind them of the definition, reframe it as the semester goes on, look back at it, remind them why we're doing this. And it doesn't get easier, but it gets momentum. Good luck.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.